Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to the Barn Bards channel. My name's Damien and I'm here today to share with you a terrain piece that's near and dear to my heart, a ziggurat I call the Temple of Snakes. Come check it out. As I'm sure you all know, a ziggurat is a multi-level pyramid with some of the most famous examples arguably coming from Mesoamerica. It's an architectural style. It's found its way into many fantasy genres. And for me, it was the very first thing that I tried to build when I got back into D&D about 5 years ago. I chose to run the classic D&D module, Hidden Shrine at Tomoe-chan, and I needed a ziggurat because that's the central location for this module. But in my rush to get it to the table, I made quite a few rookie mistakes, and my inexperience with crafting caused me to revisit this project much later on. And that's really the focus of this video, how I corrected those mistakes. Now don't get me wrong, a great time was had by all. You can see us playing here on my fellow Barn Bard Colby's badass dry erase 4x8 table. We kicked ass, there's no doubt, but after the game, the pyramid ended up on the shelf, as it were, or in the corner of my apartment for quite some time, until recently where I picked the project back up. So now that I have a bit more experience crafting and I finished this project, I can share with you folks what to do and more importantly what not to do when building a ziggurat of this size. I didn't film any of the early construction phases back in the day because, well, making videos just wasn't on the Barn Bards radar at the time. But I can use a drafting software called SketchUp to show you what those early construction phases look like. So we'll start there with the build, but most of this video is really more about how I fixed the mistakes I made and then what I did to add a layer of spectacle, a whole nother level of awesomeness using a vast array of diverse lighting effects. So grab your foam cutter, grab your soldering gun, settle in, and let's get going and get our craft on. I started off this project by purchasing a bunch of foam online. I used 2-inch and 1/2-inch thick primarily for this build. But my first mistake was to buy kind of a subgrade, lower grade quality cooler foam, and you want to use the XPS pink foam because it has a nice tight cell surface and it's really easy to texture and doesn't look funky, doesn't look like you bought it at a gas station. But the pyramid itself is built with 5 tiers, 4 quadrants of 5 tiers, 10-inch square, 8-inch, 6, 4, and 2-inch respectively, moving your way up. And the pro tip I can give you is to angle in your faces by about 1/2 inch. And this is something you'll see with monuments around the world. It's done for structural reasons and it just looks a little bit cooler. So once you measure in 1/2 inch on the top of the face, cut that off and then proceed to make 3 more quadrants. So a total of 4 corner pieces. I think the total area I used for this was just over 6 feet, square feet of 2-inch foam. The steps themselves are 1/2 inch thick and 3 3/4 inches wide. And each set of stairs took 21 stairs, the bottom being 12 inches long and the top being 2 inches. And you can see that I'm shouldering them with 1/2 inch material there that needs to be measured specifically to each set of stairs because they can vary a little bit. But once you have all your components, just line up the edges. You want to glue them together with just regular PVA glue or any other type of adhesive that you have. I had a 3-foot bar clamp which helped with this process, and then I finished off with a little 5-inch square, 1/2 inch thick capstone. And you can see SketchUp's a really handy tool for building crafts. Architects use it for building houses, and it's a relatively low learning curve. One thing about this build I should point out is that when you make it this way with the quadrants, it gives you these openings and interior cavities that you can fill with batteries and wires, so it's pretty slick. After pulling the pyramid off the shelf and digging back into the project, I wanted to add as much detail as I could. So I started by gouging out the crevices between the larger stones with a flat file. And then I grabbed a piece of ready board in order to cut out, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 100 tiny little triangles to glue to the exterior. The triangles are representative of snake motifs around the world with archaic cultures. And this build had kind of evolved from the Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan to the Temple of Snakes for reasons that have to do with an aquarium piece I found that fits on the top. And, well, there's more to it than that. But the idea, once again, was just cut out a bunch of these tiny little triangles. It was quite tedious, in fact. But it gives it a nice little 3-dimensional representation and reinforces that snake theme quite well. While the triangles were drying, I moved on to fixing the problems I had with the steps. And you may have noticed with the original build, the steps were inset to the superstructure where they should be pronounced and sticking out. So my solution was to take these XPS blanks that are 1.5 inch deep, ½ inch tall, and 3 3/4 inches wide, and then scribe larger stone steps into those blanks. So here these are 1.5 inch wide steps with a 3/4 inch step on the side, and if you take those blanks and then just turn them upside down and alternate them, you end up with a pretty cool step pattern. Of course, I'm just texturizing the part that you would see and then gluing these together 2 by 2 and then 4 by 4 and then 6 by 6 in order to complete the entire set of stairs. And once again, it's another tedious aspect to this project, but makes it look that much better. I gotta say, one of the cooler decorations that I found for this project are these awesome little snake head tire valve caps that I found online. My idea was to turn these into statues that line the corners of the pyramid going up to the top. And so that required 20 of these snake heads, and my idea was to use these barbecue skewers and magic scope epoxy in order to create a post for them to set directly into the pyramid with a wooden base. So that just is a simple plug, if you will, of epoxy in the bottom of the tire valve cap, and I set the skewer, just try and get it nice and even and straight. And then while those are drying, I created the bases. And the bases are simple wooden coins, a 1 inch coin with a second 3/4 inch coin glued to the top of that one. And when those have dried, just a matter of drilling a hole through the center. And this is kind of cheaper, kind of balsa quality wood, so you're going to bugger it up with a drill. So it required a bit of sanding. No worries there. Once the snake heads had dried, or at least the epoxy that is, had set up, I sanded that nice and smooth, nice and flush, so that the post would set square onto the bottom. That looks good. So the next step was to set the coins onto the corners where I wanted the statues to be. So that's just simply using PVA or white glue, letting that dry. And while that's setting up, I moved on to painting these snake heads. It's just a simple two coat process using a black primer and then a heavy bronze dry brush. And that makes it look like an old statue in my opinion, but it lacks just a little bit of flair. So I invested in these rubies. These are nail decorations. I don't know if they have a name, a certain name, or what they're called, but basically I bought a bag of these because they're really cheap. And I used the second smallest size. And so I think there's 40 of them. I have hundreds of these rubies though. I don't know what to do with them. Probably going to end up making some kind of dragon hoard or some other kind of treasure stash. But like I said, 40 of these set with Aleene's clear tacky glue. And I can call those finished. Those look good enough that I can put onto the pyramid. At this point, my coins were dried, so I was able to drill the holes into the corners for the statues to set into. And this is kind of cool. It's a modular piece, if you will. So if I ever want to change the motif from snake to, say, bat or something otherwise, some other type of statue, I can just switch those out. In order to address the texture problems I had with the poor quality gas station foam that I bought, was to use the all-purpose joint compound that you find drywallers using on construction sites. And if you've ever done any drywall, you're pretty familiar with this stuff. It's very thick, globs on, but dries super hard and is very durable, and of course will cover up any texture that you have without a doubt. It just required me to go back through and kind of rescribe each line with my archaeological pick and drill out the holes and texturize it. And then any excess I could just kind of wire brush off. It's very durable, so no worries there. Once that was done and I had a nice texture that I was happy with, I black bombed that for painting and moved on. This next step was a bit of a pain in the ass, where I had to create new shoulders for the steps that I had made. And I think the big takeaway or the lesson learned here is that, do it right the first time. What do they say? Measure twice and cut once. Nonetheless, what I had to do was take my 1 inch foam, my XPS foam, and measure out exactly the angles and depth of the insert, so on and so forth. Fortunately, I was able to take the 1 inch shape that I had and then split that on my Proxon so I get 2-for-1 special going, but it was a hassle. Decorating it was pretty straightforward. I was going for that snake motif that I've been using, the triangles if you will, and it's kind of an homage to El Castillo, part of the Mayan complexes in Chiapas, which you may have noticed. It's kind of the similarity I'm going for. It's a very famous pyramid, probably known more famously or most famously for its shadow that snakes down the stairs on the equinox. Very cool phenomenon produced by the ancient Mayan engineers. So this is my homage to that. So after decorating and texturizing my step shoulders and having had the steps done and everything kind of kept track of, right? I had 8 sides, very specific. Make sure I got them in the right place. Everything's all set, good to go. I glued it all together all one time to make it easy. Just using regular PVA white glue once again, but inserting my steps where they need to be and just kind of holding it all together at once to get that solid structure. And it's starting to look like something kind of cool. Time to move on to the next step. I've used foam putty before in a previous video or two, and it's a great material when you're working with foam because you normally end up with cracks or gaps or depressions in the stuff you're building, and foam putty is awesome because it dries quick after filling your gaps and it sands really easily. I would recommend using a putty knife instead of a business card though, and here you see me just kind of sanding out a nice flat surface to work on. I use a sanding block to keep it nice and flat and just filling in a little bit of the stonework. And of course you want to texturize what people will see. But I'm ready to move on to something more creative now that all the repairs to the construction phases have been done. So I moved on to the temple proper, and you can see me working on the floor of the temple, sticking with that triangular snaky theme and giving a bit of texture. But I wanted to add another element, and I'd found this really cool 3D printed Tzolk'in, or Mesoamerican Wheel of Time, that I wanted to incorporate into the piece. Basically have some kind of gimmick where the players control, space and time, and I don't know, have it correlate with an eclipse or something like that. I even have another aquarium piece of the same image, the same motif, if you will, and that's going to be a fountain of youth where they get information. I even have gold coins for the players to use. That all reinforces this idea that they need to go to the pyramid and actually manipulate that dial to affect their destiny. For the temple walls, I used XPS foam sliced to about 3/16 of an inch, that 5 inch wide and 3 inches tall. And at the top of the temple building, or the temple structure, superstructure, is this really cool double-headed Aztec snake aquarium piece that I found. Love my aquarium pieces, but the procedure here is just to make sure that the bricks are identical in size and pattern so that all ties together. And this aquarium piece is really interesting because it has that hole in the bottom, which I guess is for bubbles to bubble up through. I don't know, I'm not an aquarium guy, but I wanted to use it as a brazier, something that would have this huge fire at the top of this pyramid. And so this temple that I'm making has to support not only the aquarium piece, but the batteries and the lights and all that. But I needed it thin. I needed it thin because there's not much room on the top of the pyramid, and I wanted to have space for the miniatures to move in. So, cutting it thin required me to be, for one, to be very careful when I'm texturizing and sanding and drawing on it, but two, to come up with a way to reinforce it, to make it stronger. So what I did was make 4 posts, rectangular posts. You can see me gluing here and drawing brickwork into that are glued on opposite sides, or opposite walls if you will. So 2 on each opposite wall, and those will be kind of the posts for those walls to find strength with. On the outside, I included 4 other posts in order to hide the joins. These aren't really structural. I'm just using triangular pieces to stick with the motif and decorate the outside edges. But I wanted this all glued up beforehand, and after everything was solid, nice and dry, I glued it together. And here you can see how those posts work. So once again, 2 posts on one wall, opposite of each other, and then all 4 of these walls glued together when that's nice and dry. It's not too bad. It's pretty strong, but could be stronger. So the way I reinforced its strength was to take the foam putty I had, fill in the corners, right? I just want it in the corners, so once that's nice and I guess smoothed out, I used just a toothbrush to clean out the brickwork and all the little lines, and kind of cleaned it up so that the putty was just on the corners. Once that dried, I gave it a quick sand, nice and smooth, and then took those cool little decorative pieces that I had and just stuck them on the corners. One last kind of touch to make it that much stronger was to line the tops of the walls on the inside. So these are about 1/2 inch thick, maybe 4.5 inches long, and just glued to the space in between the posts. So now I'm cutting out the roof of the temple, the true capstone. This is a 6-inch square, 1-inch thick piece of XPS foam. And then what I do is measure in 1/2 inch and cut with my handheld foam wire cutter on my glass table to get an angular face to it. This is exactly what I was calling for earlier in the video with your tiers. I don't have the shifting lands tools to adjust angles. You can do that on your Proxon, but I like to use my handheld wire cutter for that, especially on a glass table. Works really well. Here I'm adding 3 levels of ready board foam, all a little bit smaller than each other to get that kind of pyramidal, or reinforce the pyramidal pattern and effect that I'm going for. And all of these pieces put together are meant to support that double-headed snake aquarium piece that I had, which is going to be a flaming brazier. So I needed another piece, an altar if you will, to support the snake itself. And you can see the oval that I've drawn on there is where 5 LED lights are going to be mounted. So I'm using like a, 2 volt, 20 milliamp flickering LED lights. And so I'm just kind of measuring, making sure that everything fits into where it needs to go. Because I want it to be a big fire, I want it to kind of mound up. I don't want all of the lights to be on the same level. So it's kind of important that when I make this mount, that I have the center light out of the 5 that I'm going to put in there a little bit higher. So in order to achieve this, I got my XPS foam with my holes drilled through, just double checking to make sure that my LED lights fit through. And once that's all kind of established, I go ahead and use my round drill, I guess it is, a little drill set you get for working on figurines and things, and just poke through the foam. There's no need to drill with a drill bit or anything. It's soft foam. It pokes through really easily. And this part here is where the 9-volt batteries will sit. Now I linked my lights, or I intend to, but in retrospect I had linked the 5 lights that I had in series, and because of the forward voltage I needed for 10 2-volt lights, one 9-volt battery wouldn't cut it. I actually needed 2, and that required a little bit bigger space in the foam to place those batteries. But a final piece just to kind of cap it off and decorate it with my triangle snaky pieces and some stonework. And then once everything is measured out and detailed, I go ahead and black bomb that. Once that's dry, I use a little bit of the Magic Sculpt 2-part epoxy clay to make little mounts for those lights. And I had mentioned that I wanted it to mound up or have that center light a little bit higher. So this is my technique for doing that. It's just taking little balls of clay, putting them on top of the holes that I had pre-drilled, and then re-puncturing holes through them and letting that clay dry. While everything's setting up, time to move on to my painting. Everything's black bombed, so I can move on to my second coat of gray. I've shown this card before in other videos, but I use a card just to keep track of the paint schemes that I'm using, the black, dark gray, light gray, and white. And you can see me tending to all the separate pieces, making sure that I have all the same color, it's all consistent. And once again, dry brushing here. I'm using a small brush just to test out the paint, but you can see it's a big project, big painting project, so be ready for that if you do build something of this size. And then for the temple, one of the final decorative pieces I wanted to add was this 3D replication of stonework representing Kukulkan, one of the famous gods of rain from the Mayan mythology. I was able to 3D print these out at my university. Came out pretty cool. Got them going on the color scheme that I work with, the black, dark gray, light gray, and white. and then just simply use my glue gun to mount those to the temple walls. The next step was to tackle the lighting, and as I mentioned before, I'm using 20 milliamp 2-volt flickering LED lights for my brazier. There's 3 lighting elements. This is the first one, and I went ahead and wired these in series, and if you're not sure what that means, I would highly recommend checking out Wylock's vids, Wylock's crafting channel. I think it's episode 56. He talks about how to custom build lighting for your crafting projects. But basically it's just putting all the wires together and then hooking them up to not 1 but 2 9-volt batteries. Had I done this in parallel, I would have only needed 1, but here nor there. It is what it is. So once all the lights were in place, I started to use my glue gun to sculpt flickering flames, and it's a technique that I picked up from a couple different crafters, most notably DM Scotty. I think it's episode 136, where he shows you how to make LED torches. But basically it's just using your glue gun to string out tendrils of glue to look like flame, and it's kind of getting close to the finished product here. Looks pretty good with the flickering lights, but needs just a little bit more. So what I do is I use a fine brush and I put a little bit of yellow on the base, and then just hit a couple of spots with some flashes of red. Not too many, less is more, and then maybe 1 or 2 at the most of just orange, a couple orange flicks. And all together it looks pretty dope. Next step. So at this point I grabbed another cup of coffee and decided to finish up the painting I had. Having gone through all the dry brushing all the way to white, all of the stonework, it was time to fill in the detail, which was primarily those triangles that you see me drawing throughout the video. So all of those got painted with a diluted red, a watered down red, almost a wash. And then after that had been done, I went around and with a wet sponge just kind of dabbed on some brown, and this is really watered down paint just to kind of give it a bit of stain, and then did the same with a light lime green. And the lime green's kind of hard to pick out. It actually looks kind of like algae or your lichen growth. But yeah, this is almost finished. I got my lights on top, got the temple finished, all the detail painting is done, and I got my gimmick piece, the Zulkin there, ready for spinning around and warping the space-time continuum. But it's lacking. It needs something else. So I drew upon my well of inspiration, which of course is Conan the Barbarian, and I thought back to the movie where he faced the antagonist Thulsa Doom and cut off his head and then chucked it down the stairs that were lined by those impressive braziers all the way down. I thought that was a really cool effect and something that I wanted to try and have in this pyramid build. So I went about crafting 40 separate braziers to line the stairs, 10 on each side. And it's a style I've used, a style of braziers that I've used before. I've incorporated into other builds, like my tile sets, for example, and I wanted to have that consistency, that stylistic consistency. And all it is a candle holder that's painted with a hole drilled in the bottom, filled with glue, and a LED light. Of course, this wiring task was Herculean, and I decided to try and offset the labor by investing in this Alkalox 2-in-1 soldering gun. And I highly recommend it. It's really, really nice tool. However, I didn't end up doing that much soldering, so I didn't really use it, but this is a pro tip. Get this gun if you have a lot of soldering to do. I began my soldering and wiring as normal by stripping the ends of the wires and getting it set up at the soldering station. And of course, rocking my new Alkalox 2-in-1 soldering gun. And things are going well enough, but I realized that it was just going to take way too long, so I looked for an alternative and came up with these T-shaped wire connectors. And these are pretty slick. They're rated for 20 to 24 gauge sized wire, and all you need to do is set in your primary wire, and then whatever you're going to run off of that primary wire in parallel goes into the side. The 20 gauge wire, however, it's kind of thick for these particular connectors, and it takes a bit of finagling to get them in there and closed properly. The idea is that when you close them shut, there's like little copper fangs that cut through the sheathing into the wire to make the connection. And if you don't have these squeezed really tight and they don't like latch, then they won't work. So you gotta monkey around with that a little bit. But once again, all you need to do is crimp that onto your primary wire and then attach your parallels. And so in this case I got the bitter end of a 22 gauge wire being set in there, and you just want to make sure that your ground is where it's supposed to be, and other than that just close them with a pair of pliers and you're good to go. Fortunately, there is a little diagram that comes with the package, and so it's really not that hard to sort out. So we'll give it a little bit of test here using a 9-volt battery on a, what is this, a green LED. And yeah, no worries there. So I switched it up, decided to go ahead and use these instead of my Alkalox 2-in-1, and began organizing my wires into separate legs. I had 40 total. There's 10 for each set of stairs, 5 on each set. So basically, 8 sets of 5. And my primary wire is once again 20 gauge, and all I did was just kind of string it out along the bottom, making sure that I could wrap it around the stairs and that it would have full connection around the entirety of the base of the pyramid. My power source is a car alarm battery. It's something I found online when I was figuring out my Ohm's law and all that good stuff. Something I don't understand well enough to teach, but once again, highly recommend like Wylox or any of the Google videos, YouTube videos that are out there. But basically, the 12 volt 5 amp hour car alarm battery is great because it has plenty of power and you can charge it. It's rechargeable. And then added with this kill switch, this DEFCON 4 automatic kill switch. It's a pretty handy unit to have for powering this pyramid. So once again, just taking my primary wire and marking it with a Sharpie, my weather map modifier, to basically locate or pinpoint the positions where the wire connectors go. And then wherever those wire connectors fit, I would split the wire with my archaeological tool. And I learned that if I took a lighter and just kind of heated it up real quickly, and you got to be careful because you can melt this pretty fast, but just kind of warm up the sheathing, softens up that material so that when you put it into the crimp or into the connector and crimp it, it snaps a lot easier, and I was able to make progress quite a bit faster. I also learned that using the larger channel locks gave me more mechanical advantage to squeeze them shut. But once I had everything in place, it was just a matter of gluing these connectors onto the base of my pyramid. And had I thought about this in advance, I would have done this into the recess of the foam, that is, widen the channels on the bottom. This is a work in progress, you live and learn. So I'm going to have to modify that in the future, but I'm happy with the progress I got going. It's a fairly simple affair with all of my connectors in place. It's just a matter of making sure my positive and negative leads are where they need to be, getting them inside and crimped down nice and tight. And then once that's done, I just stash the wires inside the grooves, and now it's a matter of just setting up the switch. And that's a pretty simple affair. I just wired it to the switch and made sure that I had my my shrinkable tubing that closes it off so there's no shorting of the wire itself. And then just took my glue gun and attached the switch to the side of the battery. And all of this wiring and power source is going to go, like I said, inside the center cavity, so you won't see any of it. Give it a little test run, see if it clicks on, and bam! That's exactly what I'm going for. At this point, I thought I was finished. I brought the pyramid outside to get a feel of what the lights would look like outside and away from the desk, and I was happy with it, no doubt. Had kind of hit all the marks I wanted to, but when I brought it back inside, a little bit darker, it became obvious that the temple needed something. There's an obvious kind of darkness there, void that needed to be filled. And so my plan, or my solution rather, it was to take the blue tack that I had, kind of your common gum-like material that crafters use for sticking things temporarily to other things. And in this case, my thing is a multicolored tea light that I found online. You can get a dozen of these for a couple of bucks. They're super cheap and pretty cool. They give off a lot of light. And so in this case, just glued 4 of these to the underside of the roof for the temple using that blue tack. So it's not permanent. You can pull them off if you don't want them in there, but it really fills in that void of light. So now I have 3 clear tiers of light. You got huge brazier on the top. I got like the mystical, multicolored, supernatural light going off where the Zolkin or the Wheel of Time is being manipulated. And of course the burning braziers that line the stairs in true Conan fashion. So I'm calling this project done, although there are a couple of things that I could do to really finish it off. For example, I mentioned early on in the video about the potential for modularity with these snake statues. They kind of pop right out of the hole. And, you know, for example, the original Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan was a temple dedicated to the bat god Kamazotes, which is an actual Mayan god. And so in my perusals of the internet, I was able to find these bat minis that are on the posts. I have 20 or 30 of these guys. So those would fit really nicely into the holes where the snakes are. I could swap out the snake on the top with a dollar store bat. You know, those toys are easy to find, especially during Halloween. It'd be an easy thing to do. So it has modular potential. I think Primus and the Modrons would be proud. The other thing I'd like to do is put this entire thing on a 4-foot round wooden table that had a Lazy Susan underneath, so you could spin it around, you know, and have players access it from different sides and whatnot. I think that would be handy. But there's an added benefit to that, is that on that mount or on that 4-foot table, I could put marginalia or terrain pieces around the base. So things like pots or bags of corn, cocoa, trees, tents, things that you would find in a Mesoamerican urban setting, and use those decorations to kind of hide the gap that's on the bottom. Because there is a little bit of a gap from all the wiring that I put underneath. Anyhow, potential for a future Barn Bard video right there. And speaking of which, at the time of filming this video, we've actually passed 500 subscribers. So mucho mahalo, everybody. Super awesome to have a bunch of you guys out here in the barn with us. So thank you. Yeah, that's great. Spread the word. Barn Bards are coming hard with some crafts here in 2021. And we look forward to seeing you on the old internet. So take care. Aloha. Until next time, a hui ho. Get your craft on.